My name is Colonel Andrew Keller. I'm 43 years old, and for the last 2 decades, I've served as a senior strategist in U.S. Cyber Command. I've led defense protocols against hostile nations, advised on classified AI deployments, and authored encryption systems that protect everything from satellites to soldiers. But that's not what they remember me for. In my family, I'm not a war room architect or a national asset. I'm just the disappointment, the dropout, the one who said no to legacy and yes to loyalty. At my brother's wedding, my own father raised a glass and said, smiling, "Of course, Andrew. He's still in uniform somewhere pushing paper for Uncle Sam." Someone chuckled and added, "Didn't know the Army had desk jobs." Then a woman I barely knew sipping champagne whispered, "What a shame." The older son ends up a file clerk. And finally, the bride's father said it out loud. "Every family's got one," that's what they said. In front of 200 guests, dressed in black tie and gold judgment. My mother looked down. My brother looked amused. And me, I just looked at my watch. I had exactly 7 days left before the Helios defense contract review, the one they didn't know I was leading. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the invitation. It arrived on a Thursday. No call, no text, just a forwarded email from Brett's assistant. The subject line read, "Wedding Logistics." The body of the message said, "Dear Andrew, please see attached for Brett and Caitlin's wedding schedule. RSVP by May 12th. Dress code formal. Assigned seating will be arranged. Stratex Executive Affairs." I stared at it for 5 full minutes. "No, we hope you'll come." No, it would mean a lot. Just logistics. I kept reading, hoping there was a hidden message, a personal note at the end. "I hope you're well, Andy." But it wasn't there. It never is. I could have ignored it. No one would have noticed. I hadn't seen Brett in over 2 years. We barely spoke after he took over as CFO at Stratex, the company my father built. A company I walked away from when I was 23. I closed my laptop, walked into the kitchen, poured a coffee I wouldn't drink. It was already cold. Same as the invitation. Still that night I packed a black suit, the one with the narrow lapels and the West Point pin stitched into the lining. I didn't know why, but something in me wanted to show up, not to cause a scene, not to fight for attention, just to look them in the eye. One more time, I booked a flight to Charleston, South Carolina, first class, paid out of pocket. Not because I needed to, but because I could. On the plane, I watched the clouds pass and remembered the last conversation I had with my father. It was 6 years ago. We were both at a security summit in D.C. I was presenting on national defense algorithms. He was there with Brett, courting Pentagon contracts. I had approached him during the break, expecting at least a handshake. He looked me up and down and said, "You still playing soldier, Andrew? You've got that brilliant brain, and you waste it on chain of command." Then he smiled and walked off before I could answer. So when the invitation came, I didn't expect warmth. I didn't even expect a chair near the stage. But I promised my mother once years ago that no matter how far I went, I'd show up for family, even if family didn't show up for me. By the time the plane touched down, the suit was pressed, the hotel booked, and the clock ticking. 7 days until Helios. One night to remember what it feels like to be invisible. And one moment, one tiny, perfect moment was waiting for me at table 27. Because sometimes justice doesn't scream. It enters quietly, in full uniform, with clearance. The Grand Ellington Hotel was everything I expected. Too white, too polished, too proud of its marble. The valet didn't ask for my name. He just held out his hand, took the keys, and disappeared like he had better things to park. I stood there for a second, letting the city heat slide off my shoulders. I hadn't been in Charleston since I was 15, back when my father was still teaching us how to walk with our chins up and our words down. The lobby glowed with chandeliers that looked like frozen fireworks, the kind of place where even the silence costs extra. I walked in, carrying nothing but a garment bag and the knowledge that I'd been invited, but not wanted. A young woman in a hotel blazer greeted me at the reception desk. She didn't flinch at the name on the list. Colonel Andrew Keller. I nodded. She scanned the iPad in her hand, tapping. Once, then looked up and smiled. "You're at table 27, sir." Then she pointed. Far. Back. Left corner. Next to the emergency exit. Near the speaker, but behind the curtain. The kind of seat you give to the cousin you only see in court. I smiled back, thanked her. Because that's what I do. The ballroom was packed. Navy gowns and black tuxedos floated past me like polished ghosts. There was a soft jazz trio playing something forgettable, and the air smelled like citrus salt and entitlement. I moved through the crowd unnoticed, which didn't surprise me. In this family, the quieter you become, the easier you are to edit out. Table 27 was small, 4 seats, a centerpiece of wilting tulips, 1 seat already taken by a woman flipping through stock quotes on her phone. She didn't even glance up when I pulled out my chair. Caitlin's friend from college, she asked, eyes still on the screen. I paused. "No," I said as gently as I could. "I'm Brett's brother." That made her look, not shocked, just confused, like someone realizing they forgot an appointment. "Oh," she said, offering a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Didn't know he had a brother." That made 2 of us. I sat down, folded my napkin, and stared at the head table across the room. Gold trim, crystal goblets, cameras flashing. My father stood beside Brett, one hand on his shoulder, the other raising a glass. The photographer told them to smile. They didn't need to be told. I looked away, reached into my pocket, and touched the West Point ring on my finger, just for a second. Just to remind myself it was still there. Still mine. The woman beside me started talking about crypto. Something about losing $14,000 last week. I nodded politely, hearing none of it. What I heard instead was a memory. My father once told me, never sit in a corner unless you're planning something. And I was. I didn't know it yet, not fully. But somewhere between the marble tiles and the cold smiles, a plan had started taking shape. Because table 27 may have been at the edge of the ballroom, but from here I could see everything. A waiter in a pressed vest stopped by our table offering champagne. He looked at me, then hesitated. "Are you at the bride's side?" he asked. I smiled, the kind that keeps teeth hidden and stories deeper. "No," I said. "Grooms." He blinked, glanced down at his list again like he didn't believe me, then gave a polite nod and walked off. I didn't blame him. There were photos of Brett and Caitlin everywhere, slideshow reels on the screen, framed candids on the gift table, even a looping video of their engagement in Napa. But not a single picture of us as kids. Not one. The room pulsed with applause as the MC announced the couple's entrance. Everyone stood. I stayed seated. From where I sat, Brett looked like a magazine cover. Tailored tux, fresh haircut. That same winning smile he used to get out of trouble in high school. He walked hand in hand with Caitlin, who waved like a politician's daughter. Behind them, my father followed, one hand in his pocket, the other straightening his cuff. He hadn't changed. Same salt and pepper hair, same posture, like he owned the room. Maybe he did. I reached for my water, but my hand stopped halfway. A sound. A voice. From a table nearby, a woman whispered, "Is that someone from Caitlin's law firm?" "No," another replied. "I think he's a distant cousin or something. Not important." They both giggled. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did, because that was the moment I realized I was a stranger at my own brother's wedding. I leaned back in my chair, letting the music wash over me. Trumpet, piano, laughter. but underneath it a quieter sound surfaced. A memory. It had been 3 years since I last went home. Not for a holiday. Not for a birthday. For a funeral. My Uncle Dad's older brother passed away suddenly. I flew in straight from Kabul. No sleep. Still in uniform. Sand still in my boots. I arrived at the house and rang the bell. The maid answered. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" she asked. My name was still on the mailbox, but in that moment I realized it no longer belonged to me. Inside the living room looked like a tech startup's showroom. Chrome furniture, LED accents, family photos framed like company assets, Brett's graduation from Wharton, Dad on the cover of Forbes, even my mother's charity gala. Nothing of me, not even a snapshot. At the service the next day, my father introduced Brett to everyone. "This is my youngest. Runs the numbers at Stratex." Then he glanced at me. "And that's Andrew. He's military. No title. No rank. Just a word. A category." Later that evening, I sat on the back porch while the rest of the family toasted the future of the company. My mother brought me a plate of food and said softly, "You know how your father gets. He doesn't mean it." But he did. And that's the last time I set foot in that house. The jazz music shifted back to a waltz. I blinked and came back to the present, my hands still folded in my lap. Brett was now dancing with our mother, grinning as if nothing in the world had ever gone wrong. And I was still invisible, still at table 27. But I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to remember. I still remember the day I told him. It was late April. Senior year. The kind of spring morning where the air tastes like second chances. We were in the dining room, the old one before the renovation, before the marble floors and imported chandeliers. Back when the Keller house still smelled like burnt toast and leather-bound books. My mother was pouring orange juice. Brett was asleep upstairs, probably dreaming of spreadsheets and sports cars. And my father, he was reading the Wall Street Journal like it was a sacred text. I cleared my throat. He didn't look up, so I just said it. "I'm not going to Harvard." Silence. Then the slow rustle of newspaper pages folding down. He stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "What did you say? I'm going to West Point." Stillness. My mother froze mid-pour. The orange juice overflowed, dripping down the glass unnoticed. My father set the paper down, leaned back, crossed his arms. "I see," he said. Just that. I waited for anger, for disbelief, maybe even a fight. But what I got was worse. He smiled. Not the warm kind, the corporate kind, the one he used when a competitor made a foolish move. "You want to be a soldier?" he asked, voice calm. "A leader," I corrected. He nodded slowly like he was entertaining a child's dream. "You realize what you're giving up?" I did. The Keller name meant something in the Ivy League. We had a lecture hall named after us at Princeton, a startup fund at Stanford, and my father had pulled strings, real strings, to get me into Harvard's economics program. Full ride, boardroom ready, and I walked away, because something in me needed to earn it on my own. Not through bloodline, not through legacy, through grit. "I'm not asking for your blessing," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I just wanted you to hear it from me." He took a sip of his coffee, then set the cup down with a quiet clink. "You know what your problem is, Andrew," he said. Here it came. "You mistake discipline for value. But value isn't earned in a barracks or a battlefield. It's created in boardrooms, in markets, in numbers. What you're choosing, it's noble, but it's small." My mother opened her mouth to speak, then stopped. I swallowed hard. "This isn't a phase," I told him. He nodded again, then picked up his paper. "Then I hope you enjoy your dormitory," he said, "because the corner office won't be waiting." That was the last breakfast we had as father and son. Years later, I would sleep in tents on frozen ground, spend nights tracing digital footprints across foreign firewalls, and command operations that never made the headlines. And still in his mind, I was a kid playing soldier in a uniform too big for my name. He never said he was proud, not once. But he did say one thing years later when we ran into each other at a Pentagon gala. He shook my hand and said, "You look tired." I smiled back. Some battles are worth it. He didn't respond. Just like that morning. Just like always. It was supposed to be a proud day. I had pressed the uniform myself that morning. Not a wrinkle in sight. 4 bars on the shoulder. Silver eagle on the chest. The kind of uniform that makes you stand a little straighter without even trying. Promotion to colonel. It's not a ceremony they throw lightly. They reserve it for officers who've seen things led, endured, protected. Who've given decades for a few stripes and the weight that comes with them. The auditorium at Fort Braddock was simple. No chandeliers, no string quartets. Just an American flag, a podium, and 50 metal chairs. I had reserved 3 in the front row. 1 for my father, 1 for my mother, 1 for my brother. They never arrived. I checked my phone twice before we began. Nothing. No. Sorry, we're stuck in traffic. No. We're proud of you. Just silence. Like the kind that lives behind locked doors. The master of ceremonies called my name. "Major Andrew Keller, please step forward." I rose. Applause erupted behind me from soldiers I'd bled with, analysts I'd trained, and generals who'd once doubted me. But the front row, still empty. Until the very last second. That's when I saw him. Brigadier General Morse. He walked in late on purpose, I think. Dressed not in full regalia, but a simple Class A with his old airborne pin still attached. He sat down in the seat my father should have taken. Looked up at me. Nodded. I didn't smile. But something in me settled. He stood when they pinned my new rank. Shook my hand so hard I almost dropped my citation folder. Afterward, as the guests mingled with coffee and paper cups, he walked beside me without a word. Finally, he said, "They didn't show." I didn't answer. He nodded to himself like he already knew the whole story. Then he pulled something from his pocket. A coin. Gold-plated, worn around the edges. The kind they only give out after Black Ops, the kind that's never logged. "Keep this," he said, pressing it into my palm. Not because they weren't here, but because you were. I stared at the coin. No inscription. No date. Just the weight. He turned and walked off before I could say thank you. I stood there for a long time, surrounded by congratulations and warm handshakes. But the chairs stayed empty. That night, back in my quarters, I placed the coin beside my West Point ring. 2 symbols. One earned through sweat. The other through silence. I never brought up the promotion to my family again. And they never asked, which told me everything I needed to know. My mother has always been the quiet one. Not cold, not cruel, just silent. Like a piano with half the keys muted. Growing up, she was the balance to my father's dominance. He'd speak, she'd nod, he'd decide, she'd prepare the guest towels. It wasn't submission, it was strategy. She understood the weight of words in a house where one wrong sentence could fracture an entire evening. When I told her about West Point, I didn't get a speech, no celebration, no resistance. She just asked, "Do you have enough socks?" And that was her way of saying, "I see you. I may not agree, but I see you." The night before I left for New York, she slipped a folded note into my duffel bag. No envelope, no signature. I didn't find it until the train was already moving. It read, "Wherever you go, walk straight. And if you fall, fall forward." That was all. I carried that scrap of paper in my breast pocket during officer training. When we marched 15 miles through mud and sleet, I'd tap my chest just to feel it was still there. She never said anything about the letter, never asked if I read it. Years later, when I came home from Afghanistan, I sat at the kitchen counter, uniform, still dusty medals in my pack. She made tea, sat across from me. She didn't ask about the missions. She didn't ask what I'd seen. She just pushed a plate of ginger cookies toward me and said, "You've lost weight." It was her way of holding me without arms. And yet, when the silence came from my father, when the dismissals, the jabs, the backhanded remarks started piling up, she said nothing. I wanted her to defend me, once, just once, to say he's earned more than that. Or even Gregory, that's enough. But she never did. At the rehearsal dinner for Brett's MBA graduation, my father raised a toast and called him the son I can trust with an empire. I looked across the table. She met my eyes, held the gaze for 3 seconds, then looked down at her wine. Sometimes I think that silence hurt more than the insult, because part of me still believed she might be the bridge. Instead, she became the witness, the observer, the one who stayed on the shore while I drowned in expectations she never challenged. I don't blame her. But I stopped looking for lifelines a long time ago. The MC tapped the microphone 3 times. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask for your attention, Mr. Gregory Keller would like to say a few words before the cake." Polite applause rippled through the ballroom like falling dominoes. My father straightened the cuffs of his midnight blue tuxedo and adjusted his lapel pin, the one engraved with the Stratex logo. Not an American flag, not a family crest, a company. He took the mic like he'd been born holding it. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice strong, clear, used to commanding rooms. "It's a special day for our family. A milestone." His eyes scanned the room like a CEO assessing shareholders. Then they landed on Brett, seated beside his new bride, beaming under the spotlight. "My son Brett," he continued, pausing for effect, "has become a man I admire, visionary, strategic, focused. In just a few short years, he's helped double Stratex's earnings, streamline our international assets, and prepare us for one of the most complex defense contracts in our company's history." The crowd applauded. Caitlin squeezed Brett's hand. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye. I remained still. My father held up a glass of champagne. "He's not just my son, he's my successor." Then came the pivot. "Now, some of you have asked me about my other son, Andrew." Laughter. Just a few chuckles, but enough. "He couldn't be up here tonight. He's probably somewhere buried under paperwork in some government basement." More laughter, now louder. A few shoulders shaking, a few people whispering things like "pencil pusher" or "still in uniform, huh?" He smiled as if to soften the blow, but the tone stayed sharp. He took a different path. Always has. Brilliant kid, bit stubborn. Chose the military life. Structure, rules, protocols. I suppose someone has to keep the filing cabinet safe. Another wave of chuckles. Even Caitlin laughed. Not cruelly, just politely, the way people laugh at jokes they don't understand. I didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't sip my water. I simply stared at the mic in his hand, the same one he once used to close billion-dollar deals to command boardrooms full of sharks. Now he used it to erase me in front of strangers. My mother didn't look up. Her hands rested neatly on her lap. Fingers locked like someone trying to pray without permission. My name hung in the air for a moment longer, then disappeared, replaced by music, clinking glasses, and the usual applause that follows anything resembling confidence. He sat back down, patted Brett on the back, leaned over, and said something to Caitlin that made her laugh again. Table 27 remained silent. The woman next to me cleared her throat and whispered, "That was awkward." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I had nothing left to say. I wasn't surprised. I had expected something, a comment, a jab, but I hadn't expected that tone, that polish, the way he made me small so casually, so efficiently. That's what made him dangerous. He didn't need to shout to belittle you. He just smiled and held the mic. And the room always agreed. The worst part wasn't the joke. It was what came after. The laughter didn't last long. No one wanted to be the one still chuckling when the next song started. So they stopped. But the looks stayed. Little glances. From people I hadn't seen in a decade. From people who didn't know me at all. And from some who once called me Big Brother back when we were still running barefoot in the backyard. They looked across the ballroom like I was an unfamiliar face, vaguely familiar, but no longer relevant. Like someone who used to belong, but didn't keep up. I saw a man from the legal team at Stratex whisper something to his wife. She turned to look at me, briefly. Then she smiled, not kindly. Pity is never kind. An older aunt I barely remembered caught my eye, tilted her head, then turned away before I could nod. The bridesmaids at table 5 had stopped sipping their wine for a moment. One of them mouthed the word, Colonel, like it was a punchline that hadn't landed. Someone behind me said, "Must be awkward." Someone else added, "I didn't even know the military had jobs like that, pushing paper and whatnot." Their voices weren't angry. They weren't mocking, just amused. And that's what hurt. I sat there, eyes locked on the flickering candle at the center of the table. The flame wavered with every current of air, but it didn't go out. Neither did I. I didn't clench my fists, didn't stand, didn't raise a glass or correct them. Because this wasn't a battlefield, not the kind I was trained for. Instead, I slowly reached into my jacket and adjusted the ring on my finger. West Point, class of 2004. The inscription inside said, "Honor is not spoken, it's earned." I breathed in, let the silence surround me. People talk about humiliation like it's loud, like it's a slam or a scream or a door closing in your face. But sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it sounds like silverware tapping porcelain. Like champagne fizzing in a flute. Like your father's voice fading into applause that wasn't meant for you. I scanned the room. They weren't villains, just people. People trained to see value through wealth and titles they could understand. Military rank doesn't sparkle under chandeliers. Respect doesn't come with a company stock code. And yet I stayed seated. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I had everything to prove and 7 days left to prove it. I was about to excuse myself, not because I couldn't take it, but because I had taken enough. I had reached for my napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it on my plate. My way of saying, this seat has done its job. Then the doors opened. Not the main ballroom entrance, the side door. The one near the kitchen where late guests and staff usually slip in unnoticed. But this man didn't slip. He walked in like the floor belonged to him. Not fast, not slow, just steady. A presence more than a person. Class A uniform, deep green. Rows of ribbons, a silver star on the collar. Combat service stripes wrapped around both cuffs. He was older now, grayer, heavier. But I'd know that walk anywhere. General Marcus L. Morse. He didn't glance at the crowd, didn't look for a name tag. He scanned the room once found me and walked straight to table 27. The conversations faded around me, not instantly, but like someone had slowly turned down the volume knob on the world. He stopped 2 feet from me, stood tall, and saluted. A full salute. In the middle of the Keller family wedding. "General Keller," he said. "Sir." Apologies for being late. Every head in a 10-table radius turned. Every fork paused midair. Every smirk vanished. I stood not quickly, not theatrically, just respectfully. returned the salute with 2 fingers to the brow. "General Morse," I replied. "Good to see you." He extended a hand. I shook it. "Your team at Fort Liberty sends their regards," he said. "They heard about the Helios review next week." I nodded once. "They're ready." He smiled. "Not the polished kind. The earned kind. Of course they are." Then, with no need for small talk, he turned and exited the same way he came. And just like that, the room began to buzz again, but it buzzed differently. Eyes followed him. Then eyes turned to me. At table 27, still standing, still silent. Someone whispered, "Wait, did he say, General?" Another asked, "What does he mean, Helios?" A third added, "Isn't that the contract Brett's company is chasing?" I sat down, calmly, picked up my napkin, laid it across my lap again, and reached for my water. It tasted better this time. As General Morse disappeared behind the curtain, the air in the ballroom changed. It didn't cool or warm, it tightened. Like every word, every breath suddenly carried weight. People didn't look at me the same way anymore. The woman beside me at table 27 had stopped checking her stocks. Now she was pretending not to glance at my uniform lapel, trying to figure out what those silver oak leaves meant. Across the room, Brett leaned slightly toward our father, whispering something. My father didn't answer. He just stared at me. No smile this time. No champagne in hand. I stood. Slowly, deliberately. The kind of motion you make not to leave a scene but to finish one. I buttoned my jacket with both hands. My fingers moved without rush, but with purpose. Like I'd done this 1,000 times before. Because I had. Then I reached down, grabbed the glass of water I hadn't touched during the toast, and took a slow sip. Not because I was thirsty, but because I could. A few heads turned, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of caution. Funny how titles change the temperature in a room. I made my way between tables, past sequined dresses, tailored suits, and faces I'd once known as neighbors, coaches, classmates. Some nodded at me now. Some smiled nervously, but no one laughed. Near the head table, my father rose slightly as if to intercept me, then stopped himself. I walked past him, past Brett, past Caitlin, who was adjusting her necklace with shaky fingers. No one said a word. As I reached the exit, I heard one guest ask in a hushed tone, "Is he really a general?" Another replied, "He didn't correct the other guy, did he?" No, I didn't, because I didn't need to. In this room, the insult had already served its purpose. But now, so had my silence. I pushed open the side door, stepped into the hallway. Cooler air, less noise, no stage. I stopped for a second, looked down the corridor lined with mirrors, the kind meant for bridesmaids and tycoons to check themselves before re-entering the crowd. I caught my own reflection. Dress uniform, shined shoes, 4 rows of ribbons, a name tag that read, Keller. For a second, I remembered a moment years ago after my first successful cyber operation, when General Morse had told me, "The best revenge, Andrew, is being the last man standing in a room full of people who once doubted you." I hadn't understood what he meant then. Now I did. I didn't need to fight. I didn't need to shout. I just needed to stand and leave when I was done. The taxi smelled like vinyl and air freshener that was trying too hard. I sat in the back, hands folded in my lap, watching the lights of Charleston smear across the window like watercolors. The driver asked if I wanted music. I said no. He didn't press. Silence suited me better tonight. I leaned my head back against the seat and exhaled slowly. Not from exhaustion. Not even from relief. Just from release. The ballroom was behind me. The speeches, the stares, the echo of pencil pusher still lingering somewhere in the folds of my jacket, And yet, I'd done what I came to do. I didn't shout, didn't argue, didn't ask to be seen. Still something lingered. Not anger, not shame. Something quieter, a kind of hollow. I thought it would feel good walking out like that. Thought maybe the knot in my chest would finally loosen. But it didn't. Because the truth is, when it comes to family, even victory tastes like ash. I'd spent years training for resilience, physical, mental, strategic. I knew how to take loss, how to bury grief 6 layers deep so it wouldn't show up in the middle of a mission. But nothing in West Point teaches you what to do when your father forgets to look proud. And nothing in cyber warfare prepares you for the moment your little brother laughs at your life because he thinks he's winning something you never wanted. I looked down at my lap. The gloves I'd stuffed in my pocket were still there, creased and warm from my hand. My rank insignia still shimmered under the passing streetlights. But none of it meant anything in that back seat. Not in this moment. Because titles don't heal you. And rank doesn't explain why it still hurts when your mother looks away. I closed my eyes. For a second, I was 10 years old again, sitting in the back of my father's Mercedes after my first soccer game. We had lost. Badly. I'd missed a goal, slipped in the mud, skinned my elbow. I held back tears. And my father, without turning around, had said, "You'll have to learn to lose without crying, Andrew. It's unbecoming." That was the first time I learned that pain had to be private. The first time I chose silence over vulnerability. And now, 3 decades later, I was still sitting in the back seat, pretending I didn't care that my name had become a punchline. The cab slowed to a stop in front of my hotel. I paid. Tipped. Stepped out. The night air was cooler now, less bitter. But I wasn't sure if it was the weather or just me getting used to the sting. My hotel room was small, clean, efficient, just the way I liked it. 1 window, 1 desk, 1 bed. A nightstand with a lamp that hummed slightly when turned on. I didn't bother unpacking. I just pulled out the folder I'd tucked inside the inner lining of my suit bag. Project Helios, the most sensitive defense contract in Stratex's pipeline. Estimated value $4.2 billion. Scope multi-layer cyber defense integration across airborne satellite and ground-based systems. Status pending final evaluation mine. I loosened my tie, unbuttoned the collar, sat at the desk and flipped the folder open. The first few pages were clean overview specs, deliverables, signed memos. All exactly what I expected. But the moment I hit the financial breakdown, something didn't sit right. Line 7, International Strategic Development, $22. $4 million allocated to SRT Asia Holdings. I frowned. SRT Asia. That was a holding group with no operational record tied to defense contracting, not even cybersecurity R&D. I'd seen the name before once in a flagged audit at a NATO partner base. I circled the entry, checked the dates, then opened my laptop. 15 minutes later, I found the link. SRT Asia was a shell, registered in Singapore, managed through proxies, and most notably Brett's name appeared once in a side investment memorandum buried deep in a subsidiary fund. It wasn't illegal. Not yet. But it was stupid. And sloppy. I leaned back, rubbed my eyes. So this was what they were proud of. This was the empire they toasted under chandeliers. My father had always said success is about leverage. But what he never understood was I am the leverage now. Because I wasn't just a name on a guest list. I was the final signature that stood between Stratex and the largest defense contract in its history. And I wasn't angry. I was ready. The thing about financial reports is they lie in plain sight. You don't need a password to break them open. You need patience, pattern recognition, and the willingness to read the fine print no one else bothers to. I sat at that desk for 2 hours. No music, no distraction, just numbers, charts, tables. and silence. I read every line like it could detonate, because sometimes the real bombs don't make noise when they drop. They just sit quietly waiting for the right eyes to find them. And I found them. Page 19, a batch of consultant fees marked Confidential Advisory. No agency name, no service code. Just 7 wire transfers totaling $3.7 million over 3 quarters. The bank code routed through Luxembourg. That was the first red flag. Page 32, subcontractor partnership with Mercury Shield Ltd, registered in the Caymans. No known assets. No active defense certifications. But the signature on the MOU, Brett Keller. Not as CFO of Stratex, as authorized external advisor to a third-party group allegedly managing supplemental risk audits. That's when I stopped reading and opened a new notepad. I started writing down every line item that linked back to Brett directly, or indirectly. And by the end of the hour, I had 12 transactions, 7 shell entities, 3 consultant roles outside Stratex's operational boundaries. Nothing blatantly criminal, but enough to stall the contract, enough to bury it if I chose to. And Brett, he was either covering something for someone, or worse, he thought no one would notice, because he never thought I'd be the one holding the pen this time. I leaned back in the chair, let the weight of what I'd just uncovered settle into my ribs. I'd seen this kind of mistake before young execs trying to fast-track approval pipelines by greasing just enough wheels offshore. It always started the same way: move fast, cut corners, fix it after. But in defense contracting, there's no after. You get one chance to prove you're clean. Fail, and you're blacklisted from the Federal Registry for 5 years. Minimum. I glanced at the clock. 1:42 a.m. I took a breath. Long, deep, quiet. I wasn't angry. Not at Brett. Not even at my father. I was disappointed. Because they built their empire teaching people to play smart, and here they were, playing sloppy. It would be easy to report this directly. Submit the findings. Let the DoD shut them down. But that wasn't what I wanted. No, I wanted to look them in the eye while I did it. I wanted them to sit across from me in a boardroom with charts and suits and expensive watches thinking they're still in control. And then I'd speak. Clearly. Professionally. Without a single raised voice. And I'd show them what a pencil pusher could do with the right pen. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come in the form of vengeance. Sometimes it comes in the form of compliance. And in that language, I was fluent. The sun was just starting to bleed through the curtains when I stood from the desk. My back ached. My eyes stung. But my mind was sharp. I knew what I had, and I knew what it meant. But knowing wasn't enough. Not in my world. You don't walk into a defense oversight meeting with hunches. You walk in with footnotes. You walk in with time-stamped sourced records and cross-verified documentation. And I knew exactly who could help with that. I picked up my phone and called Katie Lynn. She answered on the second ring, voice groggy but steady. "Sir, good morning," I said. "Sorry to wake you. It's fine," she replied, already clicking into focus. That's the thing about good staff, they never need to be told twice. "What's wrong?" "I need a deep dive on 12 entities linked to Stratex's Helios budget," I said, "including SRT Asia Holdings, Mercury Shield Ltd, and a list of individuals I'm about to send you." I heard the faint tapping of keys through the line. "You want financials? Or corporate registries?" "Both," I said. "Plus any crossover to NATO bloc contractors in the last 18 months. If anything smells offshore, I want it flagged." "Understood." "Timeline 72 hours, I said. "But I'll need preliminary context by tomorrow morning. I'm meeting with the DoD legal unit at 10 a.m. sharp." She paused, then said, "Copy. Do you want this quiet?" "Yes," I replied. "Very." Another pause. Then her voice dropped half an octave. "Is this internal or are we burning it?" Not yet, I said. We let them walk to the cliff first. I'll decide who jumps. Katie didn't ask for details. She never did. Sending an encrypted file link in the next hour, I added, "Use the red channel." "On it," she said, then hung up without goodbye. I exhaled and set the phone down. Katie Lynn had been with me through 2 continents, 5 operations, and a classified scenario that nearly triggered diplomatic sanctions. If there was dirt to be found, she'd find it. If there was a move to be made, she'd see it coming. I trusted her with my blind side. I walked to the hotel minibar, poured a glass of cold water, then sat again this time, not to read, but to watch. I opened the Stratex investor call video from last quarter. There was Brett front and center breaking down projected margins for Helios, talking about agile implementation, cross-sector risk, supply chain elasticity. He sounded polished, convincing, professional. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed him myself. But now I could hear the pauses, the slight tremor when he mentioned independent consultants, the way his eyes darted toward the slide, then away from it when the numbers didn't quite add up. I didn't hate him. That's the truth. I didn't even feel betrayed. I just saw a boy playing Empire with tools he hadn't earned, and it was my job to make sure those tools didn't collapse on the people who actually mattered. Because this wasn't about family anymore. This was about national security. And I wasn't just attending the hearing. I was writing the questions. The night before the meeting, I didn't sleep. Not because of nerves. Not because I was afraid. But because stillness has a way of dragging old voices back to the surface. Voices I hadn't invited. But that showed up anyway. I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel bathroom, fluorescent light buzzing overhead, towel around my waist, razor in hand. The mirror was slightly fogged, but not enough to hide me. I'd shaved 100 times before deployments, before debriefings, before funerals. But this one felt different. This wasn't for combat. This was for confrontation. I applied the cream slowly, evenly. Let the cold sting bite just enough to remind me I was alive. Then I started from the left, jawline short, steady strokes. Military style. Halfway through, a memory crept in. I was 14. In the hallway bathroom, my first real razor. Disposable. Blue plastic. My hand shook. I'd nicked myself under the chin and panicked, pressing toilet paper to stop the bleeding. My father walked by, saw the mess, and scoffed. "If you can't handle a razor," he said, "how will you ever handle responsibility?" Then he left. Didn't ask if I was all right. Didn't hand me a Band-Aid. Just left. That's the day I stopped asking him for help. Back in the mirror, I rinsed the blade. Watched the white foam swirl into the sink like clouded water. I finished the right side. Checked my lines. Clean. Sharp. Ready. Still. I stared. Not at the uniform hanging on the door. Not at the ribbons. Not at the stars. But at the man in the glass. The man who used to want to prove something. Who used to need permission. Who used to believe that if he worked hard enough, they'd see him. But I didn't need that anymore. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow I'd walk into a glass boardroom with 3 decades of judgment in my pocket, and I'd place evidence on the table like a surgeon lays down a scalpel. No anger. No vengeance. Just truth. Clean. Surgical. Undeniable. I rinsed my face, dried it with the towel. Then I reached into my duffel bag and pulled out a small black box. Inside, my West Point ring rested in velvet. I hadn't worn it in months, not because I was ashamed, but because it wasn't necessary. Tonight, though, I slipped it on. Not for them. For me. A reminder of the boy in the hallway bathroom. The one who bled but didn't quit. And the man who still doesn't. Stratex headquarters towered above the city like it was built to look down on people. 54 stories of glass and steel shining like pride in daylight, a monument to ambition. I'd been there before. Once. Years ago. When I still believed I might belong in one of its corner offices. This time, I wasn't coming to visit. I was coming to evaluate. I stepped out of the black SUV wearing full dress uniform, deep navy, pressed, silver buttons, polished shoes, 4 rows of ribbons over my chest. My nameplate read, Keller. My rank colonel, soon to be confirmed Major General by the quarter's end. The guard at the door stood up straighter before I even reached him. "Good morning, sir." "May I, Colonel Andrew Keller," I said calmly. "Appointment at Zorro 900, Office of Federal Oversight." "Yes, sir." "Please go right ahead." I didn't hurry. The elevator ride was long, 37 floors to the executive boardroom. Every few floors someone stepped in, looked at me, then looked away. Military presence in this building wasn't unheard of. But this uniform. At this hour, it raised questions they were too afraid to ask. When I stepped off the elevator, I saw them waiting at the glass doors. Executives' assistants, 2 junior legal reps fidgeting with folders. I recognized one of the women. Melissa Yang Stratex is Director of Government Relations. She looked up, saw me, and froze mid-step. Then she opened the door. The boardroom was massive. Long ebony table, 30 chairs. Wall of windows pouring sunlight onto a skyline that never stopped reaching upward. And at the far end of the room, Brett. He was standing, flipping through a stack of notes, suit-tailored, sharp tie symmetrical. Beside him, our father. Still poised, still perfect. But when I walked in, the room tilted. Not physically, emotionally. The air shifted. Chatter stopped. Every eye turned. My boots echoed on the marble floor. 1 step. 2. Calm. Steady. Silent. Brett looked up, then looked again, his lips parted slightly. Not to speak. Just to process. Our father didn't move. Not at first. But his fingers tightened around the pen in his hand. Melissa cleared her throat and spoke for the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice tighter than usual, "please welcome the Department of Defense's Strategic Compliance Liaison for Project Helios." She paused. "Colonel Andrew Keller." Silence. Thick, almost reverent, almost uncomfortable. I reached the table, placed my briefcase down, opened it with a soft click, laid out 2 folders. Aligned them perfectly. Then I looked up. My voice was calm, measured. No emotion. "Let's begin." Still no one spoke. So I pulled the chair at the head of the table, the one usually reserved for someone like my father, and sat down. I didn't look left. I didn't look right. But I could feel it. Their eyes. The weight of realization. The slow dawning comprehension that the man they'd once called a pencil pusher was here to judge the integrity of their empire. Brett swallowed. I heard it. My father finally sat, but he didn't look at me. Not yet. And I didn't need him to, because this wasn't about being seen. It was about being undeniable. The first 10 minutes were theater, polished presentations, buzzwords like multi-vector resilience and AI-augmented encryption. Brett led the briefing, flanked by 2 analysts who couldn't stop checking their watches. They had rehearsed this. Hard. He spoke well, confident, measured, the same tone he used at investor meetings, except this time the audience didn't care about quarterly returns. I waited. I nodded where appropriate, jotted notes that meant nothing, let them believe they had the upper hand. Then when Brett clicked to the budget breakdown slide 11, I tapped twice on the table. Soft. Sharp. The room went still. "Can we go back 1 slide?" I asked. Brett paused. Sure." He tapped back. "Slide 10. Next one." He clicked again. "Slide 11. Line item 7. I said without looking at the screen. International Strategic Development. 22.4 million allocated to SRT Asia Holdings. Brett blinked. A few people shifted in their seats. I kept my tone even. Can someone explain the purpose of this entity in relation to the Helios cybersecurity suite? A woman from finance leaned forward. That's a supplemental audit vendor, Colonel. They assist with offshore compliance. No, they don't, I said calmly. She froze. I opened the folder in front of me and slid a printed document across the table. According to cross-border contractor data, SRT Asia Holdings has no defense credentials, no technical staff, and no security clearance. In fact, the address registered under its Singapore subsidiary is a mailbox inside a shared co-working space. Level 18, 1 receptionist, no servers. I looked at Brett. His jaw tightened, but he smiled anyway. The kind of smile that says I can still salvage this. It's a holding structure, he said. Used for flexibility across time zones. Perfectly legal. I didn't say illegal, I interrupted. I said unexplained. I slid the second folder across the table. Your name appears here, I added. Not as CFO of Stratex, but as a financial signatory for an affiliate fund that routes through SRT Asia. Now the smile cracked. Brett glanced at our father, who sat frozen, his pen no longer moving, still not speaking. A junior executive near the window dropped his pen. The sound echoed. I leaned back slightly. You see, gentlemen? I said. Voice still calm. When dealing with federal cybersecurity infrastructure, we don't tolerate ambiguity, especially not with contractors handling data pathways linked to orbital defense relays. I let the words hang. Then I delivered the final line, not loudly, not aggressively, just precisely. If Stratex cannot justify this allocation within 48 hours, the Helios contract will be frozen, pending a full congressional audit. Silence. No one moved. No one dared. And in that stillness I looked at Brett, really looked, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing money, but fear of being seen for what he was. Unprepared. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quiet was louder than anything I could have shouted. Brett's fingers tapped the table soft, fast, involuntary. The smile was gone now, replaced by that strained stillness people wear when they're buying time their mouth can't earn. He looked at me, not as a brother, but as a threat. I returned his gaze, not as a rival, but as a mirror. Because what he saw now wasn't the man from table 27, wasn't the pencil pusher they laughed at under chandeliers. It was the man who had read every line of every deal he thought no one would ever question, and carried the authority to ask what no one else could. I turned toward my father. He hadn't said a word since I walked into the room, but now his eyes met mine. No more smugness, no dismissiveness, just calculation. Like a general realizing the map wasn't drawn in his favor anymore. He opened his mouth, then closed it, shifted in his seat. The pen in his hand rolled once across the table and dropped to the floor. He didn't pick it up. Melissa Yang finally spoke, her voice careful, controlled. Colonel Keller will provide documentation within your requested time frame. There may have been a reporting oversight on that vendor line. I nodded once. You have 48 hours, I repeated, and I expect full transparency, including original banking trails. No summaries. Yes, sir, she said, using the word like it burned. I stood. Not to leave, just to change the room. Sometimes authority doesn't sit. It moves. And when it does, people follow. I walked toward the windows, looked out over the skyline. The city stretched beneath us, small and overconfident. Brett spoke again, quiet almost to himself. You came here to embarrass us. I didn't turn. No, I said. I came here to do my job. You just happened to be in the way. He didn't reply. My father exhaled slowly, a long, quiet breath, like the final page of a report he didn't want to read. I looked down at my ring West Point. Worn, scratched, still shining under sunlight. Then I turned back to them. I recommend you fix this, I said, because next time it won't be me sitting across from you. It'll be federal investigators who don't care about last names. And with that, I closed my folder. Professional. Precise. Like a door gently shutting, with no intention of being opened again. The email came at 2:14 a.m. I wasn't awake. I saw it the next morning while drinking a lukewarm cup of black coffee at my desk. Eyes still heavy from a 3-hour security briefing. The subject line read, "About yesterday." No greeting, no title, just that. I clicked it open. Inside were 6 short paragraphs, tight, deliberate, and written like someone had rewritten them 3 times before hitting send. Andrew, I've reviewed the financial report in full. There were oversights. Some were mine. Others were signed under pressure from consultants I trusted too much. I didn't mean to cross any lines, but I did. I see that now. What I said at the wedding, what Dad said, none of it was right. I thought I understood power. I didn't. I thought I understood respect. I hadn't earned it. I won't ask you to forgive me, but I needed you to hear me say I was wrong. That was it. No defense. No but. No signature flair. It was the first honest thing Brett had said to me in over a decade. I reread it once, then again. Not because I didn't understand it, but because part of me still didn't believe it had come from him. He'd always been smooth, polished, dangerously likable. But this was plain. And it felt real. For a second, I let my hand hover over the keyboard. I could have said a lot. I could have reminded him of every insult, every silent dinner, every room I was left out of. I could have told him about the night I almost walked away from the military because I was tired of proving myself to a family that only knew how to measure success in stock options and seating charts. But I didn't. I just typed one sentence. Good men own their mistakes. Then I hit send. I closed the laptop, took another sip of coffee. Still bitter, still warm. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel proud. I just felt done. Like a chapter had closed without needing applause. Like a weight had lifted without needing to crush the other person to make it happen. Sometimes you don't need to say everything. Sometimes you just need to say enough. I hadn't planned on going back. Not yet. But a week after the hearing, my mother called. No pressure in her voice. Just a quiet invitation. We're having dinner next Sunday. Just us. If you're free. She didn't say come home. She said dinner, which in our family was the closest thing to peace. So I drove down, the same long road that used to feel like exile now felt. Neutral. The trees were still lined up like soldiers. The mailbox was still crooked. The house still wore its wealth like a tailored suit, subtle, expensive, a little too perfect. I parked in the circular drive. No one met me at the door. I stepped inside. It smelled the same lemon polish and something faintly floral. I could hear low music playing from the kitchen. My mother's playlist. Old jazz. Ella Fitzgerald on vinyl. I dropped my bag in the foyer and walked toward the living room. And that's when I saw it. The wall had always been a Museum Degrees magazine covers award plaques, a gallery of Keller accomplishments, curated by a man who believed visibility was legacy. Front and center, Brett's MBA from Wharton still mounted in its gold-trimmed frame. Next to it, my father's Forbes cover, aged but untouchable. Then a series of black and white photos from Stratex's early days, tech conferences, ribbon cuttings, men in suits shaking hands like they were making history. And now, something new. Between the last photo and an oil painting of the house, A modest black frame, centered, perfectly aligned. Inside it, a photograph. Me in full dress uniform, shaking hands with a NATO commander. Medal across my chest, flag in the background, face calm, eyes steady. I froze. For a second, I thought maybe my mother had placed it there just for tonight. Temporary. Symbolic. But then I noticed the dust pattern on the shelf, clean around the frame, settled around everything else. It had been there. Not just today. Long enough to belong. I stepped closer. My name was etched into the metal plate beneath the photo. Colonel Andrew Keller, Joint Cyber Command, NATO Recognition Medal. No fanfare, no spotlight, just truth. Finally given a place. I didn't hear her come in. But then her voice reached me soft from behind. "Your father put it up," she said. "Did it himself." I turned. She was holding a dish towel, eyes tired but clear. "He didn't say anything," she added. "Just came down one morning, took out one of the older photos, hung yours in its place." I didn't answer, because I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I looked at the wall again, at the frame. It didn't erase everything, didn't fix the years of silence, but it said something we'd never found the words for. It said, "We see you now." And sometimes that's enough. My mother didn't step closer. She just stood there, dish towel still in her hands, like she wasn't sure if she should say more or let the silence carry what she meant. I waited. Part of me wanted to walk away, not out of anger, but out of the habit I'd built. The instinct to leave before disappointment arrived. But she spoke again, quietly, deliberately. "Your father doesn't talk about it," she said, "but I see him. Every morning." She looked at the frame on the wall, not at me. "He makes his coffee, walks in here, doesn't turn on the lights, just stands. Right about where you're standing now." I said nothing. "He never touches it," she added. "Doesn't even straighten it if it tilts a little. Just looks at it. For a minute. Maybe more." She folded the towel in her hand slowly, like she needed to keep them moving so her voice wouldn't shake. "Sometimes I think he wants to say something. Other times, I think he already did." I leaned against the edge of the shelf, still staring at the photo. There were no flowers in front of it, no congratulatory plaques, just the image. Me. A frozen moment of service no one in that house had witnessed. But he'd chosen to hang it. And that meant something. In this house, silence had always meant indifference. But now I wondered if, maybe, silence was his language, the only one he trusted not to betray him. My mother stepped forward, reaching out to adjust the frame just slightly. Then her hand lingered on the glass, fingertips resting where my ribbon bar crossed my chest. "You did good, Andrew," she whispered. I looked at her, at the silver in her hair that hadn't been there the last time I lived under this roof. She looked tired, but proud. And for once I let the moment stay quiet. I didn't deflect, didn't explain, didn't joke it off like I used to. I just stood there and let myself be seen. Not as an officer, not as a son who left, just as me. The boy who once sat at this very spot building Lego tanks and dreaming of missions no one else understood. Now a man standing in front of a frame that no one had asked for, but someone had finally put up. I didn't notice the envelope until I unpacked my uniform. It was tucked beneath the pressed collar, hidden between the spare set of gloves and a folded mission memo I hadn't needed. Cream-colored. No name. Just my mother's handwriting centered in delicate, cursive Andrew. I stood still, suitcase half open on the floor of my apartment. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the background was the only sound. I sat down on the edge of the bed, turned the envelope in my hands once, then opened it. The paper was old-fashioned. Stationery with faint blue lines, the kind she used when I was at Fort Sill for basic, back when she still wrote every Sunday. the scent of lavender. Subtle, but there, just like her. And then, her words. Andrew, if you're reading this, then you've come home in your way. I know I haven't always been brave enough to speak up. I stayed quiet when I should have stood beside you. And for that, I am sorry. You were never the disappointment. You were just the one we didn't understand. That's not your failure, it's ours. Your father doesn't say much. That's how he was raised. But he watches, listens, learns in his own time. He's been learning who you are slowly, painfully, in silence. You don't need to forgive us. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I hope this letter reminds you that you were always loved even when we didn't show it right. You taught me something I never told you. That strength can be quiet. That integrity is lonely. And that sometimes the bravest people are the ones who walk away without slamming the door. Thank you for walking your path, even when we tried to block it. I'm proud of you. Love, always, Mom. I didn't cry. I just folded the letter slowly, ran my fingers across the edge of the paper. Her handwriting hadn't changed. Still gentle, careful. Still hers. I leaned back against the headboard and let the quiet settle. In this job, I'd read thousands of pages, briefings, threat assessments, intelligence reports. None of them ever made me stop like this. Not because of what the letter said, but because of what it didn't need to say. I sat at the kitchen table, the one by the window. Same table I'd had since '02 rank, scarred by hot mugs, late-night reports, a chipped corner from when I dropped my deployment trunk in SWO-9. The morning sun was rising. Soft amber light filtered through the blinds and lit the silver coffee pot like it was worth more than anything in the room. On the table next to the folded letter from my mother sat my West Point ring. I'd taken it off the night before. No ceremony, no declaration. Just placed it down after brushing my teeth. I hadn't worn it to bed in years, but somehow, that night, the absence felt heavier than the ring ever did on my finger. I picked it up again, turned it in my hand. The gold was scratched, but the eagle and sword still glinted. The year 2006 engraved beneath the crest had faded a little. Not enough to forget. It wasn't just a ring. It was a choice. The choice I made at 18 when my father offered me an internship at the Department of Energy, and I said no. When I signed the papers, shaved my head, and wore boots instead of polished loafers. And every year since I had worn it like armor, not for protection, but as a quiet reminder that I had once believed in something even when no one else did. Last night, reading my mother's words, something shifted. Not everything. Not enough to erase what was said on that wedding stage. Not enough to forget the silence during my promotion, but enough to breathe. Enough to feel like I could start reassembling the man I'd disassembled over decades of silence, disappointment, and stoic endurance. The ring sat there, still, heavy, waiting. There's a strange ritual to this kind of moment. No audience, no medals, no speech, just a man, a table, and the only symbol that ever really meant something. I slipped it back onto my finger. It slid in smoothly, no resistance, as if it never left. I flexed my hand, looked out the window. The city was waking up horns. Feet on pavement, news helicopters humming somewhere east. In a few hours, I'd be back in uniform, back in the war rooms, back in front of screens that never blinked. But for this one quiet morning, I wasn't Major General Keller. I wasn't the pencil pusher or the ghost in the family photos. I was just Andrew. Son. Soldier. Survivor of a war most people couldn't see, the kind that happens at dinner tables and across decades. And I had my ring, still fitting, still mine. The kitchen smelled like cardamom and old wood. I pulled the drawer, same one that always stuck halfway, and took out the mug, the chipped ceramic one that said U.S. Army, Cyber Command in faded navy. It was the first time in months I wasn't rushing. No briefing, no flights, no countdown clock in my head. I poured the coffee. Black. No sugar. Steam curled up like a ghost, but rising slowly in the morning light. I stood there a moment, just holding the mug in both hands, feeling the warmth seep into my fingers like something human, something alive. And then I did something I hadn't done in over 15 years. I sat, and I drank my coffee. Hot. It hit different. Not just the taste, though, that was smooth, a little bitter, like old decisions, but the moment itself. The stillness. The absence of urgency. The fact that nothing was burning. No one was waiting. And the world would spin just fine if I took this one cup slow. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Bare, deliberate, coming down the hallway. I turned. My father stood in the doorway. No suit. No tie. Just an old sweater I hadn't seen since before Brett got his MBA. His hair was messy. He looked real. He didn't speak right away, just nodded toward the coffee pot. Still the same blend, he asked. I nodded. He poured himself a mug, sat across from me like it was the most natural thing in the world, even though we hadn't shared a quiet breakfast since I was 19. He didn't make excuses, didn't try to rewrite the past. Instead, he looked at my hand, at the ring. You wore it again, he said softly. I didn't answer, just took another sip. Then he cleared his throat like it took effort just to move the air. You know, I always thought you left to prove something. I set my mug down. No, I left because I believed something. He nodded slowly, looked down, rubbed his thumb along the rim of his cup like it helped him think straighter. I was wrong, he said, voice thin but steady, about what mattered, about you. Silence filled the space between us, but for once it wasn't heavy, just honest. We sat there, two men, too proud, too stubborn, finally letting the morning soften us. He reached into his pocket, pulled out something folded, worn like a wallet photo. It was a clipping. Old newspaper. My name on the headline. Youngest cyber general leads NATO operation. He set it on the table, pushed it toward me. I've read it more times than I care to admit, he murmured. I didn't touch it, just looked at him. And for the first time since I was a boy, I saw not the CEO, not the man who once called me a pencil pusher, but a father, one who was trying. He raised his mug slightly, like a toast, to choices that age well. I smiled, lifted mine. Clink. The ceramic echoed softly in the room, and in that moment I realized something simple, something quiet, but powerful. Redemption doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in hot coffee, in small gestures, and in the way a man finally says without saying it, I see you.